Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Sioux Falls Downtown Rotary. Again, we are grateful. We are coming from the studios of ClickRain. We want to thank you for joining us today. This forum, while for Downtown Rotarians, we know we have a lot other of you joining us as well. Please know we'll entertain questions from Downtown Rotarians. I would like to introduce Jason Herbold, who is the Market President for First Bank and Trust, is going to be moderating the conversation today, and of course Senator John Thune. Please join us next week as we'll have Mayor Paul Tenhaken as our guest. Thank you for joining us and have a good day.
Senator, thank you.
You bet.
Jason, good. You are as busy as ever, so we appreciate you taking the time to talk to not only our Rotarians but all of our other guests that are, I'm sure, listening on Facebook Live. Really, to start off with, so much is going on in our country right now. It's a historic period. From your perspective, how are we doing as a country?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really good 30,000-foot question, Jason. But I think that for the most part, well. I mean, we were in a good place coming into this with the economy and everybody. Things were cruising in terms of unemployment, and growth wasn't great, but it was steady. And we were seeing wages going up, for the first time in a decade on a consistent year or month-over-month basis. So the economic indicators were really strong, and then this thing hit. And so now it's really it's been a gut punch to everybody. And so the question is, what are the right things to do to enable us to come out of this as quickly as possible, and knowing that this is probably going to be an incremental climb back out. But I think the steps that we've been taking are the right ones. I know at the federal level there was a lot of discussion around what are the best levers that we can pull. Of course, the Fed has been incredibly active trying to free up liquidity for businesses out there. And the things that we did in terms of our response really had to do with identifying where we thought the key sectors were going to be. And the PPP program, which I'm sure we'll get into, and that you guys are very familiar with, was designed really to keep people connected to work, keep them connected to their employers, so that when this moves past us, those jobs are still around. And we designed that with that goal or objective in mind, and try to come up with a delivery mechanism that actually would work pretty well. And arguably there are a lot of glitches, but I think by and large the subscription rate has been high. There's been a lot of demand for it, and those that are benefiting, I think, from those loans are being very much helped by it. And then you have for the larger businesses, the Treasury working in conjunction with the Fed, trying to create credit facilities that would respond to different crises out there. And I think they've been very using the 13.3 authority under the Fed, very quick to do that. We got the checks going out, direct checks going out to help people get some cash flow out there to help families. And then, of course, if you are, through no fault of your own, unemployed, the unemployment insurance plus up is significant relative to what states currently pay out. So if you, for whatever reason, you lose your job, you have to go into unemployment here in South Dakota, you get a certain amount. And what the federal government did is said, we're going to plus that up by $600 per person per week. And so the benefit under unemployment insurance, and that's a 4-month program, is significant. And we'll see if we need to do more at some point. And then, of course, most importantly is dealing with the health emergency. I think the economic emergency gets resolved when the health emergency gets solved. And so there was a ton of money put into helping hospitals, nursing homes, providers, as well as significant investments in diagnostics and therapeutics and vaccines, in PPE and ventilators, billions and billions and billions of dollars in this last bill that we moved to try and address that part of the crisis. But I'm a big believer that we need to increase the amount of testing until we have a vaccine. I think until you know who has it and who doesn't, we're kind of flying blind. And it strikes me, at least, that if we're going to spend dollars wisely and well right now, it would be creating a test that's universally available, that you could massively test people and determine, if somebody doesn't have it, they can go back to work. If somebody doesn't have it, they can go back to school. Those that do, we can isolate, quarantine, and get them healed up and better. So that, to me, has got to be one of the things that we really focus on coming up. But the broader question that you're asking, I think the response was big, it was bold, and I hope that it's effective. But it required Congress, which isn't typically very good at this, to move quickly. We moved 3 bills in a month. The last bill was huge. I mean, we're talking $2 trillion. And I remember in one of our meetings with Secretary Mnuchin and Larry Kudlow, and we were all talking about a $1 trillion package and what that might look like. And Larry Kudlow says, I think it's going to take $2 trillion to get the market's attention. And I was like, we were all kind of just stunned, thinking in those types of terms. But in the end, we ended up with a $2 trillion package. It's about 10% of our GDP. And like I said, hopefully and I'm sure we'll have to come back and refine and rejigger and rework pieces of this and modify it and respond to different things as they evolve. But I think the response was, for the times that we're in, consistent with and proportionate to it.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen this article, but I noticed it in Bloomberg yesterday, and the economist Mohammed El-Ryan wrote, governments and central banks are betting that one big set of relief measures will address the disruption caused by COVID-19. It may not be enough. And there's talk about the virus coming back after we let our guards down and perhaps social distancing winds down a little bit. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, if it comes back, or if we go out and we avoid social distancing a little too early, I mean, what monetary and fiscal levers can we pull? Because we've already, like you said, 10% of GDP.
Yeah, I mean, we pulled a lot of the levers, and I think there are probably limits to even what the federal government can do in terms of response. But I guess my view is that what happens after this is probably going to be when it's not going to be all clear, everybody go outside, and we're going to have big crowd at events again. It's probably going to be incremental. I think it's going to be dialed back up instead of turned on. It's not an on-off button that we're going to be able to push and everything goes back to normal. So I think it's going to take a little time. But there are some key points in that. One is when we flatten the curve, when we start actually seeing this thing and hopefully start to bending it downward, when we get on the other side of it, that's going to be an important inflection point. I think the time at which we have an antiviral therapeutic, which hopefully isn't too far away, will give people greater confidence to be able to go outside. But ultimately, the vaccine is the key point. Once we have the vaccine, people think they can get vaccinated against this. In the meantime, there's a lot of fear out there, and that makes it hard because people, in order for our economy to get back on track, 2/3 of our GDP is consumer spending, means consumers got to get back out there and start spending again. And I've been talking to businesses across South Dakota this last week, all over the state. And there's a lot of trepidation about what the short-term and medium-term future looks like. So I will come back to the point I made earlier, and that is I think you have to, until we have a vaccine, be able to determine with greater clarity, with greater certainty, who has it and who doesn't. And that's why I think this testing regime is just huge. And I think we ought to be putting all our, everything we can into that basket right now. They tell me it's not a science issue, it's a production issue. That the tests are out there. Abbott Labs, of course, announced they're doing 50,000 tests a day now, that you can get a result in 15 minutes. There's a company in California which has a test that literally you can get an immediate result from, and you can administer yourself. And you could shoot a photo to your provider, and they could clear you, and you'd have to track some of that. But to me, between now and early next year, would presumably the time at which we might have a vaccine available, we just have to figure out who has it and who doesn't. And that means not tens of millions, but literally hundreds of millions of tests. And I think we have like I said, we have the technology, we have the science. We just need to gear up, scale up the production of that. And I've been taking that message to the White House, to the administration, to anybody who will listen, because I think that's the best way in the near term of creating the confidence and the certainty and alleviating a lot of the fear that people have about being back out there. So. But it's going to be I don't think it's going to come back overnight, but I hope as we hit some of these critical trigger points, people's confidence will start to bounce back.
We know here in South Dakota how close you are with Main Street. You are one of those senators that is very close to people that are doing business, small business owners. What are you hearing from them about, they're grateful for the PPP program, so grateful. As a banker, I'm talking to them all day long. They're grateful for that, but there's so much uncertainty after this 8-week period lapses. What's your message to them?
Yeah, and I think that's That's a good question, because this buys us some time, hopefully gets the worst behind us. But then they've got to face, the potential uncertainty that exists if we start talking about a second wave in the fall, and how quickly are people going to have the confidence to get back out there. And I think a lot of that, again, is going to be determined by, as we start to, and we continue to implement these social distancing tools. And by the way, I mean, Dr. Fauci, we were on a call with him a few days ago, and he continues to say the only tool that we have right now available to us is physical separation. And so I think as people adhere to that, we'll start to see the numbers come the other direction. And when that happens and we get back down to where things are closer to normal again, I think we'll get a chance to pick it back up. And some of these businesses, at least with certain practices employed, could get back to somewhat normal. But there are businesses that are going to, if you're an events planner, if you're trying to do stuff like we do out here at the Premier, or out at Mount Rushmore, so much of our economy here in South Dakota, with agriculture being #1, comes around the travel industry. And I've talked to a lot of those businesses in Belle Fourche and Spearfish and Rapid last week, and there's a lot of, as I said, it's just uncertainty. And so I think for our businesses, use this, take advantage of the PPP program. That's what it's there for. It buys us 8 weeks. Hopefully we'll have a lot more information, a lot more data. And what really drives this is data. We've got to make informed decisions, and that's going to be driven by information and data. And tests would provide more data and more information. But there are other opportunities out there in addition to the PPP program. There's an employee retention program that we created. There are access to this liquidity through the Fed. We delayed payroll tax liabilities for up to 2 years, 21 and 22. That generates about $300 billion in liquidity for people who want to take advantage of that. If you're just trying to figure out ways, how am I going to cash flow month to month until we get the demand built back up, we're going to keep looking for things that we can do that will extend that. But you're right. I mean, PPP was designed with an idea that in 2 months' time we're going to be on the other side of this and things are going to pick up again. But I just think that you have to be positive. You got to be optimistic. That's what built this country, and nobody knows that better than our small businesses. They're incredibly resilient, but we have to give them as much confidence as possible, and that's why I think we have to be taking the right steps and doing the right things.
Makes me think about all the social pressures that will exist and will continue to mount as this time period continues to go on. And the PPP program served the needs of the 501c3s. But what about the 501c4s and the 501c6s who help, small businesses, help nonprofits and give them support? Is there going to be some support coming for those types of organizations?
I mean, I think there are always, and we were working through this, trying to anticipate, okay, who are we missing here? And we tried to look at how do you get as many people, as many entities eligible for PPP as possible. And if they don't fit that criteria, if they don't qualify as small under the statutory 500 employee or there's some other exceptions to that depending on what your SIC code is, then there are some other possibilities out there. And for a C6, for example, look at that employee retention program, some of these other tools, the payroll tax deferral, out there, and there are a handful of tools in the toolbox that you can use. But that being said, I think there will be, as we go back and look at how we refine this, because I'm sure we will, there's going to be a phase 4. We at some point we'll be looking for some of those that fell through the cracks last time and hopefully find some ways to get them either eligible for some of the existing programs or perhaps come up with something that works better for them.
Yeah. The Treasury announced last Thursday a $2.3 billion package, significant by any measurement. What does that look like, and what will that mean for Main Street and for the community banks that help serve those businesses?
Well, I think it's trying to get the dollars out there in the pipeline for a lot of the banks. The banks have, understandably, and particularly those who aren't accustomed to using some of the SBA products, where it's figuring out how are we going to get the dollars to make these loans. I mean, and who's backfilling this for us? And so I think that that credit facility was created specifically to provide, again, the funding, liquidity for commercial banks, community banks, whomever is making these PPP loans. and then trying to widen the net a little bit to include local governments. That credit facility in particular was designed to I think, respond to a concern that local governments out there that are really being stressed don't have anything that they can turn to right away. And so I hope at least that the Fed and the Treasury steps there, and they were responding specifically, I think, to concerns that lenders had out there, and to get about getting the funds flowing so that they could make these PPP loans with greater confidence. Some were having trouble accessing the portal, the E-Tran portal that SBA uses to originate some of these loans. There are a lot of questions about eligibility and, you know, whether the SBA affiliation rules, how certain companies might fit in and be eligible under that, and we're trying to get clarity from Treasury on that. We're trying to get clarity from Treasury on a whole range of things. I mean, we here in South Dakota, the gaming industry, the tribes, are they eligible for their gaming facilities? There's just a whole lot of unanswered questions, and so Treasury is trying as best they can through the rulemaking process to address that. But on the other side, on the funding side, on the cash flow side, the liquidity side, I think that credit facility was created specifically with an eye toward how do we make these programs work more smoothly and engage the banks in a way that they feel comfortable putting the dollars out there.
Yeah, the guidance has gotten way more clear as though days, you know, you got 10
guys
years
can-
in one day. of
Yeah, I feel
messaging.
sorry for you because it was like out of fire hose coming at you.
Yeah.
And I know that the banking system here in South Dakota and across the country, for that matter, has had a ton of questions. We're on the phone literally every day with Kurt Everson, South Dakota Bankers Association, with the Community Bankers Association here in South Dakota, with the credit unions. Even, you know, Farm Credit is eligible to make loans under this. So there's a whole bunch of lender institutions out there that are utilizing this, and they just need those questions answered. And it's starting to smooth out, but when you create something this big, this fast, and try and implement it, it's not, in most cases, the bureaucracy is not conducive, which is why when we looked at the delivery mechanism, the 7A program under SBA was the one that we thought made the most sense, because it takes the bureaucracy out of it and essentially turns it over to private lenders who, in some cases, have a SBA relationship, you know, were certified or approved by SBA previously, preferred lenders, and then obviously some who weren't that are now learning that process. But we thought the quickest way, they're guaranteed loans, banks are familiar with how to do it, 100% guarantees, so, you know, if used for payroll and some fixed costs, totally forgivable, and that was kind of there was a big discussion about, should it be just payroll, should we allow utilities, should we allow rent, should we allow interest on debt service, and we kind of came up with a formula, which again may need to be modified, and you guys will probably know as well as anybody that are originating some of those loans what changes need to be made, but we're going to do our best to try and adapt as we can, as necessary, to make it work better.
We live in a state heavily reliant upon agriculture. It's an already frail industry, you know this well. We see what relief could be expected in those areas, and I know you've made some efforts here with some price fixing that you maybe perhaps has observed in the cattle industry. But do you think any relief is going to come to those producers?
Well, I think in the livestock industry is now joining the crop business, and crops have been in the tank for several years in a row now, and that's a lot of stuff. It's weather, it's trade, it's you know, there are just growing conditions here in South Dakota. Last year in particular, we had a ton of acres that didn't get planted, and it's our number one industry, and so we needed to do well. Well, now you have the combined energy prices dropping like a rock, which drops the price of ethanol. So you have ethanol plants that are idling or closing down, and they're our number one market for corn producers in South Dakota, corn farmers, and corn is our number one commodity in terms of South Dakota. So you've got the sort of the fuel business, the ethanol business, which we have 16 plants that generate 1.2 billion gallons a year, employ, you know, hundreds, thousands of people across the state, are feeling that. That affects the farmers because the price per bushel of corn now is going down because the demand is gone for that. And then you've got the livestock business, which for a lot of very unusual reasons, some we're trying to get explained, but COVID being one of them, is the bottom's sort of fallen out of that. So we're trying as best we can to fashion some solutions that are workable. Clearly for crops, they have crop insurance, they have other safety net programs that we got put into the Farm Bill. But this is the first time in this last bill that we moved that we have ever singled out livestock producers as being eligible for direct federal assistance. And we've done it through disaster programs. I authored the 2008 disaster title in the Farm Bill, which was renewed in 2012 and then again in the last Farm Bill in 2018. But that's for natural, weather-related disasters. This is actually something that allows those livestock producers to access federal funds, and we made on the order of about $25 billion available. And we're working with USDA to try and create a program. I was talking to the Deputy Secretary there on Saturday, and they're trying to fashion a solution that would help, again, just get some of these guys through this tough time. And then the farmers and ranchers are eligible for PPP loans. And so, some of them it maybe won't work for, but, we tried to, if you're self-employed, if you're an independent contractor, farmers and ranchers qualify for those. They don't qualify for the EIDL for the disaster loans, but they do qualify for PPP loans. And then, as you pointed out, Jason, we're also looking at some of these, the issues with regard to packers and whether or not there could have been any kind of potential manipulation with respect to the prices that are paid to the producer, because we've seen this huge disparity between what a rancher realizes in terms of a live cattle price, cash price, versus what the price of boxed beef is and what the price at the supermarket is. And you just can't explain that kind of stuff based on the math of that supply chain on its own. And so we're trying to get some answers on that, and that's, as you point out, why we asked USDA and DOJ both to take a look at it. That's obviously a longer term issue, but because it's somewhat related to COVID-19, we're bringing it into this discussion as well.
Speaking of supply chains connected all over the world. Everything is shut down. How concerned are you about supply chains being disrupted, not only short term, but just long term because of all this?
I think it's a real concern, and even supply chain for food. When you start seeing some of these packing plants close down, they're the harvesting entity for all the things that we raise and grow that feed not only the United States but the world. And so there are real impacts there, and of course we're seeing that locally here with Smithfield. But on a sort of the broader macro level, there is I think it's going to have to be a major discussion in the wake of this, as we come out of this, about supply chains going forward and what's essential and what's critical. And I think what we've discovered through all of this is that we can no longer rely on China, have all our pharmaceutical manufacturers move to China, and then get into a crisis like this and expect to be able to have an ability to start it up quickly and get the pharmaceuticals to the point of care where we need them as soon as possible. That's true on medical supplies, PPE, all those sorts of things. A lot of that stuff has been outsourced. And those are industries that are absolutely critical during a crisis time like this. And so I think there's a real argument to be made that coming out of this, we have to look at not only China, but pretty much anywhere in the world where we've allowed a lot of these critical, important industries that in a time of national crisis are really essential to move those supply chains overseas. And I understand we live in a global economy, but I think there's going to be a lot of rethinking and recalibrating coming out of this about what types of things do we need to ensure that we have the manufacturing capability in this country to produce. And I think there are some things that we learned from this that are going to have to change. And I think there's going to be pretty broad political support on both sides to do that.
When the federal government in the past had looked at the impact that pandemics could have on the country, was it primarily through the lens of health, or did they take into account how disruptive it would be to the supply chain, just to the economics of the country?
I think there are probably, you can go back to the Bush administration when they were sort of, I think at the time, very presciently looking at what the prospects were for this sort of thing happening. And through time, it's like coming out of 9/11. Coming out of 9/11, we put a lot of things in place to prepare for the next 9/11, the next terrorist attack. Well, then nothing happens in 10 or 15 years. You kind of lose the, and things sort of just slide a little bit. And even though there have been predictions about what something like this might happen, some steps taken to anticipate it, clearly I don't think fully contemplated just how profoundly something like this would impact our country. And I think it's a wake-up call that in the future, as we look at the threat matrix that we face, and this obviously affects the entire planet, the globe. This is it's a pandemic that's affecting literally for pretty much every country, well, almost every country around the world. And it's not something that was, at least we hope not, inspired by anybody in particular. But I think it's a reminder of how vulnerable we are if somebody decided to introduce a biological weapon, a biological agent into our country. And I think we have to prepare as we look at the threat matrix, and we all look at those hot spots around the world and the possibility of a nuclear attack or some other conventional type attack. But these things are very real, and I think what we're finding through this is that if you come up with something like this and you don't have a vaccine available for it, it literally can shut your country down. And I think that's a wake-up for all of us.
We hear all sorts of conflicting information coming from other parts of the world. Do you feel good about the quality and reliability of the data that we're seeing from other countries, or what do you think?
I trust a few partners around the world, and that's about it. I don't, for example, China. I don't believe that anything China says on this, or for that matter, much of anything else. I just think they have a very non-transparent political system, and obviously they're a huge economic force in that area of the world. They want to be a huge military force. They continue to project not only economic but military power in the Pacific, and we see that every single day. But no, I don't trust anything that comes out of certain countries around the world. We have reliable partners that we share intelligence with and have been for some time. Our own intelligence was noticing some of these things in China early on and reporting back on that, but at the time the Chinese were totally underreporting what was going on, and I think not being transparent at all. So the stuff that we were getting was through some of our own sources. But I think that the Australians, the Brits, the Israelis, there are countries around the world with whom we have very strong relationships and that I think are very trustworthy partners when it comes to intelligence sharing, information sharing. And I'm not saying that to the detriment of other countries. There are lots of other countries that fit that category as well. But I think you have to consider the source. And I think when you're dealing with a country, political system that is closed, that has authoritarian impulses and instincts, that you have to be very, very leery of and skeptical about what you're getting from them.
I'm going to bring it back a little more local. It's getting pretty interesting here in South Dakota now with a lot more cases being identified. We understand that South Dakota is probably a few weeks away from its apex. How are you working with Governor Noem and Mayor Tenhaken and other leaders around the state, whether it be at Avera or Sanford, to see to it that we have resources in place?
Well, we hear from the political leaders and the healthcare leaders on a regular basis, and our staffs communicate on a regular basis too. So we're in touch, and the thing I guess we want to make sure does not happen is that we have a situation here in South Dakota where our healthcare facilities become overwhelmed or swamped and can't keep up with what's going on, hospitalizations. So there's a lot of attention being paid, I think, to gearing up there. Clearing, capacity, bed space if necessary. The healthcare systems in South Dakota and all our healthcare providers, we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude. They're the front lines. They're the people who are out there taking risks every single day, and God bless them for the job they do. I am just enormously grateful for the work that they do and continue to do to help us get ahead of this thing. But I think in terms of the political leadership level, there's good communication, healthcare as well, and our job really is to be a resource at the federal level, and we've made it abundantly clear to all of them, anything you need, let us know. Whatever that is, whether that's equipment, supplies, tests, anything we can help connect you with, or make sure that you're getting what you need, that's been clearly conveyed, and our delegation works really well together too. I had a conversation this morning with Senator Rounds, my counterpart in the Senate, and our staffs too, and Congressman Johnson's staffs work really well together. So it's a team effort, and I think that hopefully people in South Dakota understand that we have to look at it that way. We're one big family out here. We're all on the same team, especially in a time of crisis like this, and so we need to do our best to ensure that we're keeping relationships working well, and that whatever each of us can bring to the table in terms of resources and information, or whatever the case may be, that we're there to do it.
New York seems to be the epicenter of a lot that's been going on here the last few weeks. What have you learned, or perhaps what have other municipalities and healthcare organizations learned from their experiences over the last few weeks when it comes to just coordination, or what resources people are short of? Mm-hmm. What have you gleaned?
Well, I think that you have to learn how to, and it's almost, you have to look at as a big, macro enterprise business, and you got to be able to surge things to where they're needed. And there are always these stories about we don't have enough of this here, enough of this here, and you have to remember that we're not all going to experience this at the same time. And New York obviously got it first there on the coast. California saw it first, and so ventilators are surging there, and other types of medical equipment are going to places where they're needed. But you want to make sure that at the federal level the coordination of that is happening. And they do have, in the task force that the White House has created, I think, a fairly effective group of people. They're getting better. They've had some glitches in terms of logistics. But part of it, too, is just getting everything scaled up. I mean, I think we have enormous, we've seen this in the past in this country, when we need it, capacity to surge, and the manufacturing capability that we have in this country. And the question is, how do we get that going? How do we scale it up fast? How do we get 100 million tests out there? Well, we've got the capacity to do it. It's just we have to decide to do it, and we've got to put the resources behind it. And that's where I come back and say, look, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars treating the symptoms of this thing. We're talking about all the economic impacts that it has. If we don't deal with the health emergency, then all that stuff is going to become an even bigger crisis down the road. So how do we deal with the health emergency? Well, let's surge, dollars and resources into creating that testing capacity. And to me, that's a huge part of the solution. But I think the thing, if nothing else, that hopefully we're learning from all this is, yes, we're a big country geographically, and yes, certain areas are going to feel this at different times. And what we got to figure out how to do is to make sure that we're getting all the resources in the right places at the right time. And that is a huge logistics issue, and it requires a very business-like approach. And I think that the more we view it that way, the better off we'll all be. I mean, I'm more convinced than ever. I think that New York, they got a lot of help from other places around the country. I believe that hopefully as they sort of plateau and start downward, that they will start shifting some of that stuff in other directions, and that other places around the country that need it will see it.
You've talked a lot about testing and the need for testing, and you referenced the 100 million tests as an example. How realistic is that?
I think it's realistic if we decide to do it. I don't think we can do it overnight. It's not a switch that we flip, but I think if we decide that come August, when the kids go back to school, we want to have hundreds of millions of tests available so that a kid can go to school and get swabbed and find out whether they have it or not. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, a parent's going to be confident going back or letting their kids go back to school. And I think the question we have to ask is, what is an acceptable level of risk? And to decrease the level of risk, you have to have more data, more information about who has it and who doesn't. Well, how do you get that? Well, you get it through diagnostic testing or antibody testing, either one. I mean, if somebody's had it and they're immune to it, that's the same thing as testing negative. And people say, well, the test isn't 100% accurate. True. There are people who are asymptomatic. True. But the test is the way we have. And I think as the technology that gets better and better, and the more you can come up with that capability that you have an on-site point-of-care test to determine who has it and who doesn't, I think that's, from a diagnostic standpoint, is the best way to get things opened up again. But I think we do have to, we've got to calibrate our expectations about how fast we can get back up. And I think how fast we can get back up and going again will depend on how quickly we're able to harness that capacity that we have in this country to generate those types of tests. I mean, I don't think it's unrealistic to think that in 30 or 60 days we could be producing tens of millions of tests, and by the end of the summer that we're producing, I mean, I think that capability exists. It's just we have to decide we're going to do it. Now, they're up to about 2 million tests a week now. They're doing about 150 to 250,000 a day. Abbott Labs has come up with this 15-minute test now. They have 50,000 a day that they're churning out of those. And you need a machine to be able to process it, but you can process it in 15 minutes. And so you take all the labs in the country, turn them loose, and get them working with the private sector, and this seems to me to be doable. And I don't know why a country that won 2 world wars and put a man on the moon and has done all the other things that we've done through the years, can't figure out a way to do this.
In your point of view, what is the one big thing that stands in the way of that mobilization?
I think partly it has been a question of whether or not that's a solution that really helps solve the problem. I know initially I was probably a little reluctant about it, because why do we want to put all that money into testing? This is going to be over in a month, or it's going to be over in 2 months. Well, now they're talking about a second wave in the fall, or potential, hiccups where we don't, we have these, and if that's true, to me, the testing issue becomes that much more important. And I think it's a matter of political will. It's a matter of making that a priority and putting as many resources as we can behind that. Like I said, we're trying to fashion solutions that respond to symptoms in the economy created by the health emergency. And if we don't attack the health emergency, we're going to have a hard time, I think, dealing with the economic fallout that follows from it. And so I think partly, we got to make the decision to do it, and we have to engage the labs in this country, the state health departments, the CDC. It has got to be, and we were on a call last week, and this question's been raised by a number of us repeatedly. We got some members in our conference, Republican senators who have been all over this. Lamar Alexander, who chairs the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee in the Senate, has been preaching the testing issue for a long time. And the administration now has a test czar, and I'm hoping that they're going to command and marshal the resources that are necessary to attack that. Because, and I know it's not a perfect solution, but I don't know of a better one until we have a vaccine.
No. It's going to take the federal government, it's going to take private industry. Do you feel good about how private industry has stepped up in this effort?
I think that we have, as you know, in this country, as the freest country in the world in a free market economy, tremendous ability to gear up when we want to. And I think that the private sector has, and this is where everybody says, well, trigger the Defense Protection Act or Production Act that the President, the DPA, that the President has the ability to do. And he's using some of that, but I would hope that he wouldn't need to. And I think part of it is the private sector deciding we're going to help solve this problem for the country, knowing that in the end it's going to benefit us in the long run. It may cost us in the short term, but it's costing everybody in the short term. I was talking to one of the CEOs for one of the car manufacturers last week, and he was pointing out, and we were talking about the whole situation, what we need to do, and how soon they're going to be able to get their factories opened up again, operating at scale. And but in the meantime, they're making ventilators, and they've got a goal to turn out, in the next 100 days, had turned out 100,000 ventilators. So, I mean, I think that's great, and I hope we see more of that, but the private sector is a big part of the solution, and I think sometimes they kind of look to the government and say, okay, this is your problem, you solve it, and that's the problem in this country I think we've gotten too dependent on, is we look to Washington for solutions. And yes, we need leadership out of Washington, we need leadership from our political leaders, but we also need that capacity, that grit, and that determination that has characterized our country for generations to gear up and respond. And so, yes, the private sector, I think, has been responsive, but I think there's a lot more that they can do to help address this crisis.
When you think about all the coordination and the additional legislation that will need to be passed, how in the world do all of you U.S. senators and congresspeople coordinate those votes when you're supposed to be isolating yourselves? I mean, how do you do all that?
Yeah. Well, it's complicated, and we're running out of money in the PPP because it's been so heavily subscribed, and so we've got a proposal to increase the funding authority by about $250 billion. We allocated $350 billion, and we're burning through it. I think about $200 billion's out the door already, and which is it's a good problem to have. And again, it's exactly what we wanted to have happen. We wanted businesses to stay in business, and I've talked to a lot of businesses here in South Dakota who have benefited from it, are very happy about it. You've probably talked to a lot of businesses who are frustrated because it's not working. And I know that in the lender community there have been a lot of those concerns too. But I do think that we have to be able to figure out how to really surge. And I think that the country, as I said, has the capability to do that. And I would hope that in the days and weeks and months ahead, we'll figure out a way as political leaders to provide the resources, the backing that the country needs. But it's hard because our leader, Mitch McConnell, went down to the floor last week, and he's the only one left in Washington. I mean, we have a couple of people who actually live out there that come in and open up the floor because we have to do pro forma sessions every 3 days to keep the Senate functioning. And so he went down to the floor and asked unanimous consent to increase the funding authority for the PPP program by $250 billion. It was a simple bill. All he was doing was asking to raise the number, nothing else. And the Democrats objected. And we live in an era where there's everybody sort of looks at things as if you're going to get something, I got to get something. It's Washington politics is very transactional and very divisive, and there's an assumption that if the other side wants something, it must be to my disadvantage. And I think in this case, you just have to pull together and say that we need this program to work. It needs additional funding authority, and we don't have a way of getting this done right now, absent unanimous consent, without bringing everybody back into Washington. And right now, D.C. is supposed to surge, I think, next week in terms of their peak. Or since they surged, but they're supposed to peak next week. And so the question of whether or not we could, even get everybody in there is an open one. But Pelosi and Schumer right now are objecting to doing anything unless they get a bunch of stuff they want, most of which are things we've already addressed, and we don't even know, the money isn't even out the door yet. I mean, they want more money for hospitals. That may be necessary, but we've already got $100 billion allocated. Only $30 billion's out the door, just went out last week. And we've got $150 billion for state and local governments, none of which has gone out the door yet, and they want another $150 billion for state and local governments. So at some point, I think you have to say, let's see what's working, what's not working, and make some hopefully informed decisions about what we can and can't do. But one thing we know is working, it's implemented, and there's huge demand for it, is the PPP program. Mm-hmm. So we need to move it. But if we can't do it by unanimous consent, it gets very, very complicated in a world where you can't travel. And I don't know what the solution will be, other than I've told people if we need to respond, we will do it. And if it requires everybody having to go back to Washington, whatever the country needs, we intend to do it.
Can you do electronic voting?
We don't have that capability today, and it's never been something that has been serious. It's been objected to on both sides. Both Democrats and Republicans in the past have objected to remote voting. We have a few people who are for it. There's a bill that would actually allow for some sort of remote voting on the part at least of the Senate, and but it's never gotten any traction. And there's always been this view that you know, this is where you know, our work is done, and there are always you know, questions I think about, if you started doing that, does that then become the norm? Does that become
Right.
the practice? And do we, you know, lose sight of what our job is? And our job is to go to work in Washington and work with our colleagues to try and get good things done for the country.
Yeah. What's normal is all
I
up
know,
in
it's
the
a whole-
air,
it's
it
a
seems
different-
right now. And speaking of that, you've done a lot of interesting work on the future of some pretty big things. Artificial intelligence, robotics, 5G. I'm curious as to how you think that fits in the current moment and how jobs are going to change.
Well, I'll tell you, I couldn't be, you know, when as I think people know, I chaired the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee for 4 years, and when I was the chairman, one of the things that we focused on was just connectivity, and knowing that we were going to have an increasing demand for connectivity in this country. And so we've tried to put in place solutions. We moved legislation that creates more spectrum for wireless broadband use. It tried to create you know, more infrastructure in this country, and we've benefited from some of that here. I mean, Sioux Falls is one of the first countries, or first cities in the country to get 5G, and we're still in the process. Verizon is starting to build that out. I've had interactions with CEOs of other companies around the country that are in that space that are talking to the leadership here in Sioux Falls too, and elsewhere across South Dakota, about how do we build out that sort of high-speed, faster, lower latency, higher connectivity, Internet of Things type, those types of networks, and we're making some good headway. But we still have places in South Dakota that don't have broadband, high-speed broadband, and so we've been pushing the FCC to increase the funding in rural areas that are underserved to try and get those high-speed broadband services available to people all across the state, no matter where you live. And there are pockets around the country, and there are some here in South Dakota that don't have it. So we're pushing hard on that front. But I think, to your point, AI, you know, robotics, quantum computing, there are tremendous solutions out there. The use of drones is going to become even more important in the supply chain, I think, in the future, and that's an area that we were very involved with when I was the chairman of the committee. But looking at these newer solutions, ways of creating greater connectivity, and I can't think of a time where we've needed it more.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about right now, how we're doing this very event today is through all this technology, and I've been doing Zoom and Shindig events. I did a Shindig event with John Hoeven, the senator from North Dakota, last week with the 1 Million Cups organization in both states. And so, but there are platforms out there that you can enable to do these types of things. Distance learning. I mean, kids are now at home learning remotely, and so we're trying to precision agriculture, telemedicine, telehealth. We did a bunch of things in this last bill to increase the use of telehealth so people didn't have to come in, get exposed, or expose other people if they've got COVID, and can get treated remotely. And so these are all things that depend upon those technologically driven solutions. And I think that is incredibly important, and especially in the moment we're in right now.
Yeah. Do you see more focus on just workforce development? It seems to me that these changes are going to really illuminate how prepared we are, you know, for this new dynamic workforce and work needs.
For sure, and we've talked about, we've had held hearings on workforce for that new era, and what are the types of skill sets and you know, attributes that people who work in those fields are going to need, and how do we prepare them for that? And we've done a lot of work on that, and some folks out here are doing a really good job. I mean, Southeast Tech, for example, created a separate program to train people with the skills to do the towers. I mean, you got to build towers. You're going to have more, you know, wireless capability, especially in the 5G era. You have to have more towers because they're more densely. They're not as spread apart. It's a different type of you know, spectrum than is used in current technology in 3G and 4G. So, and then trying to free up more mid-band spectrum that can carry these types of, you know, that you can build these types of networks on top of is really important. And so you've got to have the capability, the expertise to build that infrastructure and then to operate it. And I think we have to be thinking strategically and starting early on, not at the career and tech ed level or the college level, but in middle school and high school, about how do we start getting young people ready for these fields. And there's some really good paying jobs in those fields, and some don't require a 4-year college degree. And I think we have to be, as a community, business leaders. And one thing I would give, I think this community has done a great job of is really thinks ahead and is kind of looking out there beyond the horizon and figuring out where do we, what's that future going to look like. And I credit, the mayor and his team for really anticipating, particularly too with some of these technological breakthroughs that we've had, 5G for example, being willing to engage in those conversations and come up with solutions.
I think we're going to open it up for questions from Rotarians. I do have one for you that was provided in advance. The U.S. Postal Service is especially important to highly rural states like South Dakota. A 2006 law forced the Postal Service to pre-fund its employee pensions out 75 years, unlike other federal agencies and most private pensions. Delivery demand is temporarily down due to COVID-19, and the United States Postal Service will run out of cash in September. Do you support a federal funding assistance to the U.S. Postal Service?
I support keeping the Postal Service going, and what that looks like is a point of debate. I think we have there are a number of reform proposals that have been brought in to try and keep the Postal Service viable. I think this is a particularly acute crisis for them simply because it's, the COVID-19 is, people are worried about things that are being touched by other people and that sort of thing. But they are going to hit a crisis point here. And I think that the federal government in the past, they are not, they're not a federal entity anymore. They're independent, private, but we have oversight over them. We'll be thinking about further what's the best way to reform the Postal Service to keep it viable, and especially looking at their pension liabilities, and we did change that a few years ago, and that's something I think that members of Congress are willing to look at again.
Okay.
But it's becoming more and more acute as each day goes by.
Okay. Well, Senator, we thank you so much for your time. Before I have two more questions. This is a softball one. I'm a fellow Coyote.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on the USD women just getting robbed out of the spotlight? I mean, how tragic.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking. I was bragging them up all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
I was telling everybody from the Senate gym to the, watch these girls, they're good. And they just had such a special season.
Yeah,
it was just historic, and they were so good at playing a team sport in a team way. They were unselfish, the way they distributed the ball, the way they defended. They were just a really special group of women.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart that we are never going to see how far they could have gone.
Mm-hmm.
And as an athlete and a fan, and somebody who has been cheering South Dakota's sports teams for a long time, seeing a team go 30-2 and beat some of the high quality caliber teams that they defeated this year, and move up in the national rankings in the way that they did, is just really unfortunate they don't get that opportunity. But what a great season, and they'll look back on it with great pride. Yeah.
The last question is really, we have Rotarians from across the state listening right now, and non-Rotarians. What is the last thing you just want them to take away from, what are some thoughts that you have for them?
Well, first off, thanks to Rotary for hosting this and for always being such a gracious host. We get to Rotary a lot of different places across South Dakota, and it's a great organization, and it does a lot of great work in our communities, and we're grateful for that. And it brings people together, engages them in talking about solutions that are good for the overall growth of our economy here in South Dakota and our communities, and not just growth in a very sort of numerical way, but growth in the quality of life and the standard of living. I think we've been very blessed in South Dakota to have the kind of leadership at the civic level, the business level, professional level, that has made South Dakota just a great place to live and to work and raise families. So I appreciate the role that Rotary plays in that. And I guess I would just say in this unique time that we're in, that now more than ever, we need to be able to pull together and look for ways to serve, realize that it's not about us. We're all very blessed and fortunate to live in this state, and I think benefit from all the wonderful opportunities that have been created by investments that others have made, those that preceded us, those that are currently looking at what that future in South Dakota looks like. And I just want to encourage people as they look around them, look for areas to serve, look for areas to be difference makers, particularly now, because I think they're coming out of this. There are not only a lot of economic hardships, but there's going to be a lot of people who struggle emotionally. It's tough. If you're, and I think of a person, if you're living by yourself, how lonely it would be at a time when you can't get outside. And our faith community steps into that void in a big way. But I want to encourage our business community and leadership as well to try and find ways, maybe new ways that you hadn't contemplated or thought about before, for investing in the lives of others who I think we're really going to need it, and look for those opportunities to be difference makers. So that probably sounds a little bit trite, but.
Well, Senator, thank you for your time. Thank you for your service and your leadership
Jason.
at this historic moment. So thank you.
And
for
yours.
coming.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It's good to be with you all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rotary.